That would be an interesting study. I'd like to see the meal frequency. I've seen, I've looked at a lot of studies on intermittent fasting, dietary restriction in humans, and finally figuring out like why a lot of the data wasn't being replicated in humans that was found in monkeys and mice, and then they figured out humans, when they're dietary restricted, tend to eat more protein because it's more satiating, and then you're like, oh, so then their IGF-1 levels were going high, and but eventually those things were sort of teased out.
Right, but even down to satiation.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a made-up word, and the entire context of that word is used in talking to people in a chronically fed state. I'm satiated.
Yes, you are.
Right. So what I'm saying is, if we're going to change the language, we have to fundamentally as scientists especially, we have to disengage from all those studies. They're all polluted. It's like today, if I'm going to do a cholesterol study, I can't, because there's nobody out there that it has the issues that are on statins. The ones we did before are about the best we're going to do, because we can't do a randomized control and put someone and say, just don't do what you're doing, and the other guys do this. So we've polluted the data set. All of the studies are varying protein, carbs, and fat, a thing that I want to get rid of. Well, so I'm going to hold protein constant at 12%. And so in order to do that, what am I going to do? I'm going to study sugar versus oil. Okay, what have you just learned? Nothing. Because if I add a whole food starch, I screw up my protein number. If I add legumes, I screw up my protein number. If I add any of the things that I would actually really eat, I screwed it up. On the fat side, okay, you add lots of meat, you're screwing up your protein number, whatever. So what everyone's arguing about, the sugar versus fat crowd, the whole crowd, if you really look at the papers, it's pretty easy to see. They're basically arguing of that. And you can look at any arm of the study. It's really a simple thing to just look at a study and say, you know what, I'm not going to even think about this. Look at the carbohydrate arm. And you need to see two things. First, did the fat go down? Not these goofy studies where a low-fat diet is 40% and say, oh, well, yeah, that's what they ended up eating. Well, no. If you're going to control it. You and I can't say, well, we were aiming it to get 4 millimolar, but the lab tech just couldn't get it right and got it at 20 millimolar, and so therefore we're just going to go with that and still call it a study. It's just ridiculous what gets out there and published. But if we look at it on the carbohydrate arm, always you'll see a rise in the carbohydrate arm, and you won't see an increase in fiber. And if you don't see an increase in fiber, that means they added refined sugars.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
And it means that it's compared to what you and I eat, it's an irrelevant study. We don't need to debate sugar versus fat anymore. It's irrelevant, because I don't eat oils, nor do I eat sugar, because I don't use the energy without the food.
So
all of my foods, all of my dietary sugars, all my dietary starches, all my dietary fats are all come from whole foods. So, for example, if we could eradicate the word carbohydrate from the diet, just that one, think about it for a second. If I don't have the word carbohydrate, I can't equate a whole food starch with a refined sugar. There's no way to connect. I can't equate a carbohydrate to cotton, also a carbohydrate.
I always say refined carbohydrates.
Yeah, but even if you say that, you're still not saying specific. This is a carbohydrate. The wood floor is a carbohydrate. Termites eat wood. Moths eat shirts, cotton linens. So what I'm saying is these are all carbs. Chitin in crab shells, carbohydrate. So
it's a vague term. Yeah, it's not very.
So it doesn't mean really anything. Then we got to start saying complex carbohydrate. What the hell? Now we're just making the language. This is nutritionism.
We're confusing it.
And yet, if you do a study and say, I added potatoes and this is what happened. I added beef and this is what happened. Instead of a protein source.
Yeah.
Because for most,
I added Twinkies.
Yeah, this is what happened. Exactly. So the point I'm making is that it makes more sense, because the labels just confuse. We have the eat more, eat less policy in the United States that came out after the McGovern report, which basically is when we're going to say something good about food from a government perspective, eat more fruits, eat more vegetables. If it's something that's bad, we're not allowed to name the food. Eat less saturated fat, eat less oils, eat less refined sugars. We're not allowed to say the food. And from a government policy level, that's really what we do. And that's what happens in the messaging to the public. And you look at all across the agencies, they all use that messaging.
Do you know why that is? What was
Because they devastated the beef industry when they said don't eat red meat. To this day, everybody says red meat, and there's really not that much difference between any of the meats. They're all right about the same. We're all animals. Now, if you report the calories per weight, yes. The fat per weight, it's the same. But if you report fat per calorie on all the different cuts of meat, we're all between 25, 30%. We're all really, there's no lean meat. They're all about the same. I mean, they're very, very close. And so that, again, we have 26, 27 national institutes of health, but nutrition is controlled by the USDA. Do we need to say any more? I left NASA because I knew they weren't getting us into space. That wasn't going to happen. NASA's a great organization, a lot of smart people there. Everybody wants to do stuff. But in a mature bureaucracy, there's a rule against everything. So getting back to our stuff, what I'm saying is that if we would change the language and talk about food, like all the things that you talk about on some of your videos that you do, the short videos, like your smoothie or whatever, yeah, you're talking about what's in it, but you're always putting foods in there. I don't see you dumping powder in anything you're doing. And I don't either. I know we've talked about this, that night we talked. So if we started with a whole food diet and we say, okay, we got a whole food diet. Now, how much do I need to meet my minimum energy needs? I meet it. If I'm active, I'm going to have to eat more. If you're in the baby, producing time, and that's what you guys are trying to get pregnant, you're going to have to definitely eat a different diet. But then how do we deal with that whole meal frequency and eat it in a smaller window to address this fasting? Or do we need to go a couple of days? I don't think anybody can answer those questions.
Well, that's what I was wanting to get to with the what time frame do you need to fast to get specific benefits? And the specific benefits that I really am interested in is the increase in autophagy, which then increases hematopoiesis. These processes are very important for long-term health and something that I'd like to sort of tap into. Right. And from Walter Longo's research at UCLA, at least in animals, in mice, he's shown that it takes 48 hours of intermittent fasting to activate that whole autophagy system robustly and to increase hematopoiesis. Right. So now, whether or not that's applicable to humans or if there's, I don't know. And I'm trying to get in contact with him to figure that out. Right. Because I'd like to know. I'd like to know, do I need to incorporate 48-hour fasts to get those autophagy, benefits that I want? And
this is my goal post book. I get my book out there just because I want to get sort of the language changed, how we're talking about food, to be able to get more people like us that can extract the social paradigm, which is, I don't care if you think what I'm doing is radical. It's not biologically extreme, and there's a lot of different benefits. And studies that are starting to be, I want to see studies that are done that don't use the template of 3 meals a day. You're going into starvation mode. We got to make sure you get every single thing. We got shut down by an IRB. It was embarrassing, but we got shut down by IRB. I won't say where, for me to eat potatoes for 2 weeks in a metabolic lab because the IRB said it wouldn't be nutritionally sound.
Based off of?
Nothing. Okay, now, never mind, I had a better calorimeter than this major Ivy League school. Mm-hmm. Their IRB didn't want me to do it. Mm-hmm. We were going to do some full comprehensive blood work, something that we could at least write up as a case, something that could be a seed to get some funding. But that's how polluted it all is.
It really is.
And you talk to your average dietitian, and now the protein, carb, fat, it just becomes just Jabberwocky.
I personally just want to figure out the best diet that what I can do right now to extend my health span. Absolutely. And right now I've been turning to what's known. I've been looking at these super centenarians, which I know these people there are individuals out there that are 115 years old and are cognizant and are healthy and are still active. They're not just crippled and so I want to look at these individuals and understand what is it about their genetics, because we know that things like intermittent fasting, dietary restriction, we know that hormesis, different plant compounds, that are present in a variety of plants can activate a variety of genes that may be activated in these individuals. We know, for example, FOXO3 is one that's well known to be associated with.
And that's Luigi Fontana. I mean, he's big in
exactly. And so, what can we do with our diet, with our lifestyle that can activate these different pathways to help us live to be longer? But to get on that, to sort of on that note.
So temperature.
Yes.
Cold.
So temperature. So
tell me about Wim first of all. So I know you interviewed him, but tell me your whole thing. Isn't he amazing, man?
He is full of energy and passion.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. We had a really fun time.
A couple of years ago, I went over and we spent a week together just to get before everything was on the rush. He was like in the what he was going to do next phase, and we just spent every day just talking all day and night we were laying in beds and we were in the same room. We were just having these conversations. Felt like, in camp when you were kids, and you're laying there in the dark talking about stuff, hearing all these stories. And what was really fun about the whole thing is that as I was, I went out and I usually carry just the gloves. I use the AG gloves. They're really A gloves, but they have silver on them because you can use your iPhone, and they're just little cotton gloves. And I use these little ear bags. And if I cover those two symptoms up, I can tolerate cold really well. So I have my gloves on and I'm out walking, And
where are you guys?
We're in Amsterdam. So we're just walking to the grocery store. Yeah, it's like February, and we're walking to the grocery store, and we walked down, and he walked down, and he wants to strip down and get in the water cold. He's just this way. It's just fun. We had a great time. So anyway, we're walking back, and he's looking. He goes, oh hi, and that thick actually said, look at this. The Iceman has a coat, and you have a short sleeve shirt. He said, this looks crazy. So then he took his jacket. He said, I need to, and then when he got home, he opened all the windows. He said, I've been trapped in this apartment all summer. But it was really interesting that, people think of him, and you see this, people think of him extreme. And what Wim's actually trying to say is not extreme. He's saying humans can do this. Mm-hmm. We can't. A normal human can do it. This is what I'm saying now about fasting. A normal human, I'm not superhuman to go without food. This is normal. And normal humans experience it. And what's interesting is, just like this time with that, and what we have in our metabolic winter hypothesis paper, is this, the fact that these two traits, cold stress and dietary restriction, hit the same genes, hit the same UCP1, hit the same PGC1 alpha, So
there's overlap, yeah.
Yeah, there's overlap, and that winter never comes. There's never a time of cold stress. There's never time of dietary restriction, scarcity, and we're in a chronically lighted environment because of modern light. So if we think about this, the idea unfortunately gets, the cryotherapy, and and it's all gets sold as extreme, but what you found, like in your sauna thing, and I don't know if you've talked about it on another blog or whatever, but the idea that suddenly you get this amazing sleep, sleep.
I didn't. So recently I had this experience where I had done some very extreme temperature contrast therapy, where I was sitting in a very hot sauna. At its peak, it was 220 degrees Fahrenheit, which is very hot. And then transitioning I was bearing the pain. I was sitting in this hot sauna, and really pushing it. Like I wanted to get out, but I stayed in. And then finally got to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm going to get out. And then I went straight into a ice bath, a very cold ice bath. It was just lots of ice. And that was also very difficult because it was cold. So I was going from hot as hell to really cold. And that was the first time I've ever done that.
Did you notice that the pain sensation on both sides was the same?
Yeah, it was burning.
Yeah. It's interesting. We only have one sense.
What's interesting, I met with this, okay, well, let me get to the sleep thing. I'm going to get sidetracked like I always do. But so I did this 4 rounds, and I had a variety. I noticed that I felt really good, really relaxed. There's lots of things going on in the brain. And I've done the sauna for years, and the sauna also makes me feel really good. And I've talked about some of the mechanisms by why that occurs. But the way I felt with the contrast therapy was a little different. I felt extremely just very relaxed and very, very happy and pleasant. And I've done cryotherapy, and cryotherapy also, where I was standing in this chamber with liquid nitrogen. I also felt really good, like after doing that for 2 or 3 minutes. I forgot how long I did it for, but I got out and I felt good. And I know that's, norepinephrine's being released. It's been shown with cryo and cold water immersion. But anyways, back to the contrast therapy. The thing that was so surprising to me was the fact that it completely reset both mine and Dan's circadian rhythm, where usually like him more than me, we're kind of night people, like where it's like, I'd go to bed before midnight, but he struggles to go to bed before midnight. And so we were at 9:30 p.m. So we did this in the evening. So we started like around 6 p.m. I think. But by 9:30 p.m. we were in bed and asleep by 10, and then we woke up the next morning at 7:30.
Right.
And that is not our typical schedule, and certainly not his typical schedule. And that was very surprising to me, the contrast therapy resetting my circadian rhythm.
So one of the things you asked earlier about cold stress and weight loss for the people I work with, that's actually one of the things I do. I want them to get a lot of sleep. So I have sort of more of a metaphor, I guess, to use to sort of simplify things, but metabolic winter, I think of dark, cool, still, and scarce. Metabolic summer is bright, warm, active, and abundant. So, one of the things that I want them to do is get a lot of rest. Like, seasonal affective disorder. Is it a dysfunction or is it a feature? Because, if you don't have a lot of food, it's really not worth it. The idea that we're running through, with spears and getting stuff is, a bunch of, cartoon stuff, I mean, the idea was we would hunker down, we would wait, and interestingly, the first plants that we see, the first green that comes up through the ground are all attached to bulbs, starch, underground storage organs, which is kind of an interesting, easy way to find them. But the contrast therapy, so I have them do 10 seconds of warm, 20 seconds of cold. I have them repeat that 10 times and then end on cold. Now, at first, it sucks.
This is a shower?
Yeah. There's a contrast shower. And it sucks at first.
How hot is the water?
You just need to get warm. Right, okay. So you get either a Gym Boss timer or get the app on your phone, and set it up for like a Tapta would be, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and repeat 10 times, end on cold. So 10 seconds warm, 20 seconds cold, right? End on cold. And we developed this literally in his apartment. We were talking about the benefits and we were talking about the saunas. We were talking about that. But what could we do in a concise amount of time that would get us going? Well, as a complete coincidence, just like you, I was doing something. I don't know, whatever. It was late, and I was still going. My mind was still going, and I went and did that, and I realized, I'm really getting sleepy. And so then I started repeating, and it's like, wow, I get sleepy really fast. I may hit the bed and I go to sleep really quick. So at first, because our skin can't sense absolute temperature, we sense differences. In fact, Wim did one little finger test, and they made him with ice water pass out, which is kind of funny because he said, when the ice man passes, I submerged my body in ice, and they did this little test, and there's this strong, I don't know I haven't looked up, but there's some strong reaction, something they do with your hand, and it has a strong response, and it can make people pass out. So anyway, but the point is that our bodies sense differences. I wrote a blog about this on mine. It's called Changes, and the body really, like if you're out working in the fall, when you go out, it's cool, and you start raking the leaves, or you start doing something physical, and then you take off layers, and now you're cool, now you're fine, or whatever, and then you walk in the house, it feels hot, right? And you say, it feels hot in here, and everybody else says it feels normal in here, You're turning down the thermostat, and vice versa, walking. So we sense these changes, and so what we tried to do is make it practical where we can do it. And what I found with myself and with 100 or so people I work with is that doing it in the morning just lights you up like a Christmas tree. You just feel ready to go. You get out and go, whoo, you're ready to go. Not a cold shower, but the cool, and then there. And you can go as cold as you want. You have to have a big contrast. At first, you might not go as far, but eventually you're going to go full cold because it's like 50, 55 degrees. You can handle it. Everybody has a part, their belly, their back, their face, something about them really makes them like, tighten up. But you'll figure that out. And what's paradoxical about it, and I saw this on my blog and people reporting back, this is all a couple of years ago, was that you start tolerating heat better too. And it was kind of weird. You start sweating less. Your body starts getting sort of more adapted to this contrast, so that when you go from one environment to the other, you just doesn't seem to be as much of stress, which means when you go out walking, when you go outside, I always have people do the reverse of skiing. So instead of layering and taking them off as the day goes on, I say carry it with you and only put it on if you really need it. You know, cover your symptoms first. You know, we don't get frostbite, you know, of the head. We get it of the nose, ears, toes, fingers, the extremities, right? Vasoconstriction happens, and when vasoconstriction happens, we start losing the circulation as it's cold. But if you cover those symptoms first, and that was my very first experiment I did before the first weight loss, is why am I cold? And just sitting out on my back porch with a notebook, trying to say, okay, how do I stay out here until I can't stay out here anymore? What makes me go back? And what I found was my ears and face will send me into, I can't stand it anymore, way more than my body. Mm-hmm. So back to the contrast showers, what doing this contrast does is it slowly elevates your tolerance for cold. Like right now, I have 0 cold tolerance because of the fast. Mm-hmm. Like, and I opened my windows last night, and it's, you know, even at 66 degrees, which my house is normally even colder than that, it starts feeling really cool, you know. It's so you know, that's just a temporary thing. And last time it took about a month and a half or something to where my normal cold tolerance came out. I know it pretty well. But as you do this contrast therapy and you end on that cold for 2 minutes, again, in the morning it gets you alert, and at night, because of the, I think where you are in your circadian day, it makes you sleep. And I did the same thing in Australia that you did in terms of reset, and I tried it. Now, I didn't get completely over jet lag, so it wasn't really a complete success, but I used a combination of melatonin and those mild cold stress and light, you know. And it still took a day or two. It was worse coming back for me. It was much worse coming back. And I didn't completely fix it, so there obviously is a time function that we sort of can't avoid. But I think something as simple as that has benefit.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to try to dig into some of the mechanisms there, because it's hard to find, but I'm planning on trying to understand it, just because it was profound for me.
And there's really good data. Maybe I can find a Dropbox folder and send you a whole set of links.
Yeah.
But like on clinically depressed patients, they were doing 5-minute cold showers with 60 degrees F, and they were having as good of results with medications, with their depression.
Please send me that, because I've been theorizing that would be the case based on the fact that cold, if you're I think it's around 60, anything below 62 or 63 degrees Fahrenheit, 17 degrees Celsius, whatever that is. It increases norepinephrine.
Right.
And
so mild cold stress, when I talk to people, first of all, I don't think people really need to be doing ice stuff right now. I mean, it's just, there's way more risk, and you can get a lot of benefits above it. So what I always tell people, because I think everybody goes to the extreme, and the fitness industry is the worst about this, but basically the guidelines I give to people is this, is that mild cold stress begins at 80 F in water, okay? And it's begins at 60 F in air. So that's about where that's where you start seeing a change. You start seeing a metabolic response. You start seeing a hormonal response at about those temperatures. Water is really easy to deal with all the way down to 60 F. When you get a little bit below that, it starts hypothermia. And walking hypothermia is a real problem. And you can become hypothermic and not really know it, because that shivering response shuts down and you go into your non-shivering thermogenesis, and yes, you boost up, you can get 300 to 500% increase in metabolic rate, and you can measure this, which I can show you some stuff later that you can actually measure it, and a shift in respiratory quotient towards what we want to do, which is fat burn. But it also, the risk of injuring yourself goes up greatly. So my caution to everybody is to play in the mild places first and then go down. With air, if you're above... Can
you send me the studies on the risk of injury as well?
Hypothermia is all over the place. There's basically a chart, but if you look at the chart, and I'll show you what it is, if you just put water in hypothermia, you can get a chart and there's an exposure time. Now, obviously, I can exceed that by far, and women can exceed it by far.
Yeah.
You can train yourself to do it. What I'm saying is you get the person out there, they get all excited, and they start extreme, and then they wind up having a problem. So, and the air one is below 32. Below 32, you start having a bigger risk. So if you work in the range of that of 60 to 32 or 60 to 80, you pretty much, for a normal person, you're going to do just fine. Now, for swimming, because one of the things I want to do, this is the last time I'm ever doing weight loss stuff. I'm done with this forever. So I'm actually going to start exercising again. I haven't exercised for 5 years now, only cold stress. Yeah, so all of this kept even after 5 years. You know, all my muscles actually shrunk down, which is kind of weird to look because the volume of water leaves your muscles when you're fasting. It really freaked me out last time. I was just sure that I was just atrophying like crazy. I was really like, I've really screwed this one up. But when I got back to the DEXA scans, as soon as you start eating and getting minerals in your diet again, sodium and other stuff, the water comes back up.
Okay.
You know, so like for example, when you pump up in a gym, you're not adding protein or amino acids, you're just adding fluid. So anyway, but my point is that I stayed fit, I kept muscular, and I did it all through cold stress. I just did cold stress.
Okay, so what was your protocol?
So the contrast shower water is one of them. Okay. I also have a 8x16 swim spa that I put in my backyard, and I have 110,000 BTU heat pump on it. So I can take it to 45F, all the way up to a hot tub. My kids love it. You know, they have their kids over, have a party, it's all 102, you know, whatever. And so a regular cold exposure in there, and I would just lounge. I mean, you know, for example,
shoulders under?
Right, up to the face. In fact, I did a thing with Stephen Leckhard from Wired. When he came, we did all kinds. I've got great data from him, but we did feet, I think knees, waist, shoulder, and head, where he was always submerged. So I was doing metabolic rate the whole time.
What temperature was the water?
60. I did them at 60. I did them at 70. I did them at 80. So
and those were essentially the same between all three temperatures?
No, there was some differences.
Okay.
And then also I did, and a lot of this is on a blog. I think it's called, what did I call it? If they just go to the metabolism tag, I came up with some stupid name for it, but it's something metabolism, mastering metabolism or something. Anyway, I do it in the third part. I talk about Stephen's results, and down in the comments section, I posted even more data because people became interested. I don't want to put much of it up there just because it gets boring. But the swimming, getting back to swimming. I want to take up swimming. I've always been able to swim, so I've never been afraid of water. I scuba dived, I was a water skier, I love swimming. But I never learned to like swim laps, you know, and you know, I really want that graceful to be able to swim. Swimming is the only exercise you can start at any age, at any level of fitness, and you can do it to the end of your life. So I want to introduce, and what's interesting about resistive swimming, which means if you're swimming on a tether, and you're swimming in a swim spa or a tether in a pool where you just have a mount, so you have like a fiberglass rod and a rope that goes through a band. When you're swimming, it's really you know, glide left, glide right. You know, you're basically cutting through the water. It's not really a power move. You know, it's really about the hydrodynamics of the water streaming over you. You know, but when you're swimming on a tether and you're not moving, it's like slogging through water. So it's actually physically more difficult to swim on a tether. It's the same activity, the same feel, but when you move, you start moving that fiberglass rod and you start bending it down some, and if you let off a little bit, you start going back. So it becomes, even swimmers, really good swimmers have told me, I had, you know, Olympic athlete in my pool, and she said, you know, it really definitely gives you a workout if you want the workout part. But what's really amazing about Stephen's data is that when he got out of the water, instead of doing what everybody does and jumping in the sauna, we just had him sitting there and we were measuring his metabolism the whole time. And his respiratory quotient went from 1.0, which is most activities are burning glycogen, whoosh, almost to 0.7, almost pure fat. And for over an hour, he was still burning fat.
And that's after what temperature being?
And that was 70. So for swimming, the optimal temperature of comfort and impact is about 75F with all the stuff I've looked at. Not studies, but stuff I've looked at in my pool. Right around there, it's not too much of a shot. Now, 70-degree water for someone who lives on the West Coast, they're like, what? You know,
right. That's what I'm thinking.
If you live in the South, it's the Gulf in Mexico, it's like 80 or in the tropics, and down at 60, it starts becoming something, right? So
what do you mean by becoming something? Like your metabolism really speeds up?
You're still going to burn carbohydrate as long as you're really active. And if you're shivering, you're burning carbohydrate. You're not burning fat.
Really?
Right? Shivering is exercise. So here's what we know. We talk about this a little bit in the metabolic winter hypothesis, which is, I believe exercise is mimicking cold stress. I believe most of the benefits we're seeing, because here's what happens. If I have people exercising and they start to start exercising, not shivering, they start to exercise, they produce irisin. Irisin is known to upregulate and create more brown adipose tissue. And we've seen this happen. There's these studies, and they've come out in the last 3 years or 4 years. Well, what's shivering? Shivering is original exercise. I mean, we don't really have to go do something at a gym. I'm not talking about people that want to look better. I have no problem with people having it as a sport or a competition or whatever. Our conversation is in the silo of longevity and healthfulness. This is metabolic. So the first step of cold stress is that I'm shivering. Now, this is a very energetically expensive way to produce heat. Why? Because now, 20% of it is being used to move the muscles and do that. So then what happens? A little bit later, shivering stops, non-shivering thermogenesis kicks in, upregulation happens, UCP1. Mm-hmm. Now I'm just using, electron leaks through the mitochondria, and suddenly I'm not producing ATP, I'm just producing 100% heat. What's the cell using to do that? It's grabbing the most energy-dense fuel, and it's using lipids to do it. So that's a real good adaptive strategy, because if you were keeping warm using glycogen, you'd run out very quickly. Or if you were using it and it was coming from gluconeogenesis, you would run out really quickly. So what's interesting is that if you think of exercise as a way that we mimic mild cold stress in the past, or periods of mild cold stress, a lot of the benefits might actually be the same.
Yeah, I think there are definitely a lot of overlapping benefits, like the brown adipose tissue, PGC1 alpha, the increasing mitochondrial biogenesis, all these fat oxidation.
They all overlap.
Yeah, but there are absolutely important benefits from exercise. Like I was reading today about on the brain, how it's like doing aerobic exercise in midlife for a mouse, like prevented the blood-brain barrier from breaking down, decreased the amount of activated microglia. Right. So there's a lot of other benefits from exercise that are not related.
The point here is, and that's this is about changing our conversation, because it almost is impossible to talk about something other than exercise without someone saying, yes, but exercise. Forget that. We all know there's benefits to exercise. Let's just put that aside for a second. And let's say, okay, what specifically might be going on? What specifically? The same people probably didn't study the same people that were mild cold stress. And maybe some of those same benefits can happen with that. So all I'm saying is that it's possible. Mm-hmm. You can't prove right here, but it's possible that a lot of these benefits of this excess moving, because in nature, all organisms are conserved. They conserve. They live a conserved life. We want to think of them being all active, and they're all on the hunt, and they're more active than us, and we live a sedentary lifestyle. But the opposite of sedentary isn't exercise. The opposite of sedentary is active. And I didn't say I wasn't active. I didn't say I never got on a bike. Mm-hmm. I just didn't change clothes to do it. I didn't say I didn't ever go out with the kids for a walk. I didn't say that we don't go. I'm a skateboarder, so I didn't say we didn't go longboarding. I just said I didn't change. I didn't count it. I didn't write it down. I didn't do it.
You're not going to a gym. You're not like,
what I'm trying to say disruptively is, wait, let's stop talking about exercise for a minute, because this all got started around 1911. Between 1900 and 1911. McFadden was the first one. I'll show you the books from room where all this got together. And the link of diet and exercise happened primarily through the calorie. Now, we've since learned there's a lot of benefit, but the vast majority of people think it's energy I'm outputting energy and I'm inputting energy and I'm trying to maintain that balance. And that's really not the way I'm thinking of exercise. I'm thinking of exercise the way we think of food differently. See, we're on the same side of that. And I'm saying that there are things that exercise does that might likely mimic cold stress, because exactly the same thing happens. It doesn't make sense for the body to create irisin that creates a tissue that burns fuel and just creates waste heat, unless it was more energetically do it. If it was more energetically to get up and move, to create the waste heat, to go get something, that would have probably been the pathway. I'm saying there's a good argument to be made that maybe the benefits are that we evolved those sets of cold stress responses that happen to mimic the dietary restrictions as a survival mechanism for winter, and we've just engineered winter out of our life in the last century.
We do have temperature-controlled environments,
right?
You know, and I think that both temperature extremes are important. And it may, you know, if you're living somewhere like in the South, it's hot as hell in the summer, and the winter is cold. You know, maybe that's the way it's supposed to be. Maybe your body's supposed to be shocked by the heat and shocked by the cold. But instead, we come into these heat and air-conditioned houses and you know.
And what you said when we were talking to the party, you know, when we were sort of making our little mind melt implosion in the center of the room, right? You know, I think we sort of forgot everybody was there. But the heat shock proteins, they're very similar to the cold shock. So the point I'm saying is, if we could just entertain the thought, you know, Aristotle said it's a mark of the educated mind to entertain the thought without embracing it. And I'm saying, let's put exercise aside for a second, just like I'm saying, as soon as I start talking about calorie restriction, intermittent fasting, immediately the dietitians go, yeah, but you got to have balance. You can't be deficient. It's like, okay, we understand that that's there. We don't want to talk about deficient. We're not talking about deficiency, but they don't even know a concept. They don't even know an idea behind how a person would possibly even live. They think you die in days without nutrition. They do, and you know it's funny, right? And yet I'm having this is a pretty challenging conversation.
It's today 23.
Go ahead.
On your 21-day fast, what happened to your bowel movements?
They stopped. I still have my one.
When, how long?
The last one I had was Monday at a 7-Eleven on October the 12th.
And today's November 3rd.
Yeah, I haven't. Yeah,
you
just don't have
that's
them.
Pretty wild.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. You don't have bowel movements.
Can you please do a U-biome? I want to. Oh, you didn't do it
damn
before.
It! I know. I wanted to.
What's wrong with you?
I just had so much to get. I just had so much other. I mean,
that would have been
all the blood work I did was so expensive, and I've used really donation on my blog. There's plenty of opportunities to do this again. Absolutely, I should have done it. And the last time the nitrogen, I forgot to do nitrogen.
You didn't do nitrogen?
I didn't do nitrogen last time I had DEXA, so this time I did nitrogen. So I have that. But anyway, getting back to cold stress.
Yes.
And the point I'm making is that this is what I mean about change in dialogue. And what I'm trying to do in my book, Our Broken Plate, is talk about how we can separate things. I got a chapter on exercises. Look, okay, I'm starting this off. Exercise has a lot of benefits. Okay, did we get that over with? Okay, I don't want to talk about that anymore. I want to talk about where exercise overlaps with these really cool, really, pun intended, I guess, cool things in our biology that are connected with longevity. Mm-hmm. And it's like extreme. Okay, I know we can live in extreme environments and we can deal with all extreme stuff, but quite frankly, I don't have this testosterone rush. I don't have to beat my chest and say, I'm the He-Man with the abs. I just really care when I live long. They can have the abs, whatever they want. So the point I'm making is what I want to do is look at this cold stress and say, okay, look, here are all the things that we know are upregulated. Here are all the things that happen. Yes, they have an overlap with exercise. And then over here, we got nutrition. And there are things that we need to be nourished with and things we don't want to be deficient in. But here's where we have dietary restriction. And I think that something can be put together. And then you add the third part of the trichotomy, which is sleep. Right. It's clearly sleep is beneficial for both of those. So, if we look at this little trichotomy as sleep, cold stress, and dietary restriction, to me, that's the axis we start with. And then the exercise, again, just like we talked about with starches and starches and sugars earlier with the studies, all the exercise stuff a lot of it is done on people that are living in a normal world. So if it makes you better in a normally overfed, overnourished kind of world, that doesn't mean people that have actually are approaching diets like you and I care about our diets, and we're approaching something, at least the best we can figure out, approaching something that's optimal, if it's necessarily going to have the same benefits as us. It might drive overnutrition, because there is a feedback loop. There is a point. There is a tipping point.
I'm just in my head thinking there may be a temporal effect too, because I just now am recalling a study. So this animal study I just told you that was just published in FAST Journal, I believe. Maybe it was PLOS. It's one of the, I'm sorry, I don't remember which journal, but it was published like today, where they showed that in midlife, aerobic exercise had all these positive effects on the brain, delayed, markers of Alzheimer's and all this stuff. There's another study that was published about last year in Nature that showed that cold stress, it was mild cold stress. Actually, it was more than mild, because it was more like standing in a refrigerator for 30 minutes. So
right, every 2 hours.
Yeah, but it showed that that mild cold stress protected against Alzheimer's disease in animal models that were genetically engineered to get Alzheimer's, human Alzheimer's. Right. It showed that it protected against it, but only if the cold stress was done in early life. Mm-hmm. So if the cold stress was done in midlife and not in early life, it had no protective effect. So it's kind of weird, and I'm not exactly sure why. But I do want to ask you on the cold stress. I would be interested in seeing studies to see if there's synergistic effects on the brain. I'm also very interested in the brain and the effects of exercise.
Most of the work that I did on cold stress, because where I was in that point in my life was I was really I didn't understand calories, and so I was really trying to understand how can we maximize calorie burn. I really believed the goal at that time was to create more metabolic output, and I hadn't quite found that I can control weight and everything perfectly with the dietary input is actually pretty trivial. So now that my goal has flipped, so a lot of the things that I know about this are ancillary to what I was looking at the time, but I've aggregated a lot of studies on that.
Yeah.
So just it would be a great data dump. When we go back, I've got a lot of them. Unfortunately, I have to have paper when I'm reading a paper. I can't do it online. I can't do it electronically. Maybe with the new iPad.
Some people are physical, like you remember things by physical.
It was just because I did it that way for so long. I always had notebooks. I always wrote whatever. Maybe with the new iPad Pro, whatever is big enough and I can write on the paper. Maybe that'll give me enough tactile input that I can do it. So the downside is I've got all these PDFs that are lost in Mendeley. The upside is that I have a lot of them organized because of our paper. I have a lot of them in one place, and we can just do data bump. But I wasn't looking at what you were looking at. That's the point.
But I want to ask you about the like a protocol. Let's say someone that wants to try to increase some of their brown adipose tissue. They want to ramp up their fat oxidation using mild cold stress. Is there some sort of general protocol where you say, spend, in addition to your contrast therapy that you mentioned, you spend 20 minutes in 60-degree water or something like that? Is there something that you think would work?
It's on my website. I actually have the data right there. You can see it. I mean, it doesn't burn a significant amount of fat. That's the downside. Okay. So you're not going to really. The weight loss is minimal. It does in addition to dietary restriction, but you have to have some kind of deficit to start with. But it definitely shifts your RQ. And what I have seen is that generally speaking, after a few weeks of cold stress and doing restrictive diet, where you're just running at a chronic deficit, you're going to see your RQ shift more towards 0.7, more it lowers, it goes more towards fat burning. You can get yourself easily into a mode where about 75% of your day is burning fat or metabolizing fat if you keep your activity low. As soon as you start doing things that raise your activity, your respiratory quotient starts going back up, and then you're on the glycogen treadmill, which is why all these people want to get into ketogenic, because they want to change the system. But I'm talking about, something that also benefits the microbiome, et cetera. And if I do that lifestyle, then the microbiome, it's like pushing a bubble on a bumper sticker, they're just pushing the problem around, but nobody's worried about the microbiome. And that ends up being, I think, like we said earlier, that's actually the most important place. That's where we need to start.
Gut health.
Feeding it and making sure we get that. But shifting it over to fat, you absolutely can with cold stress. Most people just don't have access to cold water.
What about sitting in a cold bathtub? Like if you just put cold water?
Yeah, I think that, again, what I do when I'm skiing, for example, is because since I was skiing every year, but I wasn't doing any activity or any training before it, right? So normally what that would mean is like on the second or third day, you would just be fatigued and your legs were wasted like noodles, right? Everybody would think. Yet, never happened to me. And the reason why is as soon as I come off the slopes, I go into the bathroom, I do a contrast shower, end on cold, and then the bathtub's already filled up with cold water. As cold as it'll come out of the tap, just sit up to my waistline in cold water, and all of that leaves. And you feel, when you get out, you almost feel as if you could go run or do anything again right then. It just does that. So that's like a little simple strategy that I use for that. I moved past the calorie thing because in order to do the calorie balance, I needed to understand food. And so then when I got the calorimeter, I did some things with Steven on activity. And all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute, it's all the food. It's the food. It's the food. Because no matter what I was doing, the numbers that I measured, when you're really measuring your calories and you're really seeing exactly how much fat and carbohydrate you did in this session, and it's like you can't hide from it. And it's like over and over, I'm like, wait a minute, it's the food. So that got me off on the last 4-year rabbit chase to figure out how did our relationship with food break. So, to not answer your question, but to address it at least, to say is that I don't think I have it at that granularity. And I think to me, where I am now, my interest is really in how much cold stress do we need to activate these things. That's where I wanted to go next with it. Next with, just like we were talking about earlier, with crowdfunding and potentially doing stuff with dietary intervention that we can measure these biomarkers, okay, then with or without cold stress, I live chronically in cold stress in the winter, so I let my temperature fluctuate with the outside. My heat is set maybe at 50. So it goes up sometimes because the day is warm and, you get whatever.
Wow.
Then
so at night it gets cold.
Yeah, and I don't sleep with blankets. So
at all?
No.
You have a sheet?
No, sometimes
at 50 degrees?
Yeah, so I can sleep. Now, right now I can't, but because of the fasting. Yeah. But I conditioned myself. This is one of the things I did before all the stuff that came out in 4 Hour Body. I started with blankets, and I'm like, we had blankets, or we blanketed because we never used to heat bedrooms. That's what blankets were for. The rest of the house was cold. And now we blanket and we heat the bedroom. So I started with the blanket and I folded it down, and then, you'd have it back in the morning, right? And then you fold it down, one night you wake up and I didn't use the blanket tonight, it was halfway. And I found that if it's just on my feet, just actually the weight on my feet, and it turns out I have enough. And, a lot of my friends are astronauts. One of my friends, Scott Parazinski, and they talk about sleeping. A lot of astronauts can sleep free tethered and float. And a lot of astronauts need to tether to something because they need that feeling, because they just don't like the, mummy free float thing. So I'm a little like that, and my feet need some kind of weight on them, and that's what I need. So then I start with a sheet the same way. Put it halfway down, sleep without it, and then you get it back up. And where you end up with is really an interesting place. So for me, the comfort you get from a blanket, that this is like sugar feels good and food gets good and that sort of thing. The comfort you get from a blanket is sort of this warmness, this, womb-like feeling. That feeling for me is between me and the bed. And when this side gets cold, I turn over, and that's the warm spot.
But you acclimated yourself to
But I acclimated. Now, have you ever taken a nap on the sofa?
Yes.
Did you need to use a blanket? No. You can just sleep on the sofa.
I don't remember.
Well, you know my point. People fall asleep on the couch all the time. You don't need to do all that. It's just conditioning. And so you don't just put all your blankets off and say, I'm going to sleep without covers. That's crazy. That's just you're not going to do it. You got to do it slowly. And there's a really simple test to see if your room is too warm or you're over blanketing. And that is, if you stick your feet out from the covers at night or in the morning, or you have to stick your hands out. If you do those two things, that's a sign that you're sleeping with too much covers, because that's a way to trick your brain into thinking you're cooler than you really are. Because we actually have to go to cool. So on to melatonin, which is a natural place. You know, everybody knows about melatonin reset and that sort of thing, and we can talk a little bit about the sirtuin and the, you know, that paper I sent you with the activation, which I think is good for the longevity stuff. But, you know, one of the roles of melatonin is to have you drop
core body temperature.
Temperature through your extremities.
You actually told me that. You're the first person that told me that when we, you know, met a couple of months ago, and I was completely fascinated. And I looked up the studies and I found, administering melatonin to people does make their core body temperature drop.
So what's neat is this is part of that. Got to drop the brain temperature. And what we do is we have this warm room. We get in our warm pajamas. You know, we get in our flannels. We put this blanket on. Everything is antithetical to what our body's trying to do. Now, enter the contrast shower. You start out with the contrast shower, say 30 minutes or an hour or so before you're going to go to bed, right? Out of the shower, lights go off. Now I'm into the, you know, all these people walking around, blue block, whatever. Fuck, I don't do that. Just come out of there, lights go off. I have a little red light that's, my bed light is red, and I switch to paper. The screens go off, and now I'm in my old books. I love to read my old books, right? Okay, 30 minutes I stay in the dark. I do about 30 milligrams of melatonin a night.
That's a lot of melatonin.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot of melatonin. It is. I do about 30 milligrams a night. And there's a lot of really great stuff that was done in the 90s on melatonin, the antioxidant side, and obviously this longevity stuff. Yeah. And I don't fear it. I don't think that it's a bad thing. I'm doing it exactly when my body would be producing it.
Let me ask you again. So the contrast shower was 10 seconds warm, 20 seconds cold.
And on cold.
How many times? And on cold for 2 minutes.
10 times.
10 times and on cold 2 minutes. Right?
Yeah, you know, just I want you to get used to it, because that's the conditioning part, right?
Because I want to see if it does my circadian rhythm.
And then dry off, get in bed, and then at that point I don't do the dark. I do dark or I do red lights.
No blue light.
Right. So I do that. I don't do screens, and then I wait 30 minutes. And then I do the melatonin. Now, sometimes it's a problem, because it used to be like after contrast showers, I told you I'd hit the pillow and I'd fall asleep in like 7 minutes. You know, you get sleepy. And I usually lay my melatonin, I use the fast dissolves. So I usually find them, I used to have them, you know, just laying down there ready to go. And I'd wake up in the morning, there they would still be. Yeah, damn, I forgot it. But anyway, so the melatonin, and one of the things it did for me is it completely cured secondary insomnia. It just
the contrast
the combination of those two.
Melatonin.
Yeah, and I tried time release, it never worked. I tried melatonin alone. I was doing the 1 milligram that did nothing. And if somebody just starts with 30 milligrams, you're going to feel hungover in the morning. So you can't just start there. Because, do you know have you played with melatonin?
I have the largest dose I've done. I usually only take melatonin if I am trying to get over jet lag.
Right.
And I've done 3 milligrams, or if I'm traveling somewhere I can't sleep.
So for a normal person doing melatonin at that point, if they go over the dose, the symptom is in the morning they feel groggy and they don't want to wake up.
I've heard about that.
Right.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, it's just not possible to do that. So it's just not possible to do that. But I built up over a while, and I'm getting obviously past 40, my melatonin's fallen off precipitously at this point. You know, that's what all the studies say. I'm doing it at the circadian time, the time when my brain would be releasing it, probably is releasing it. And I feel like at that point I'm also, I'm entering a fasted state as well, the dietary restriction. My meals were earlier in the day, so I'm far past. I'm in a post-absorptive state at this point. And so I just feel like it's going to be beneficial. And then this study just came out, and unfortunately I haven't had a time to dig into the one that I posted for you, which is the basically SIRT1 and melatonin and resveratrol all working together. Mm-hmm. So they found a synergistic effect with melatonin, SIRT1, melatonin and resveratrol and SIRT1. So again, I see this clue once again of this little trichotomy: sleep, dietary restriction, cold stress.
Well, melatonin's a hormone, regulates 500 different genes. Yeah. I mean, that's 2.5% of the human genome.
Yeah.
It's like you said, it's one of the most important hormones that regulates brain antioxidant activity.
Right.
And that's been those studies have been shown.
I mean, in the 90s, there were a lot of really, I know there were sort of fad diet books, but they were serious researchers too. They were all publishing, all the little books that are the small print that we used to come out the way diet books used to be, before it was big money.
Yeah.
And then the color glossy stuff we see today.
And you also mentioned that, you're at a point in your life where your melatonin's dropping precipitously. And it's at least from the studies that I've seen, it like around 40 years old.
Yep.
Your pineal gland starts to make less and less serotonin.
Yep.
I mean, melatonin. The other interesting thing is that, most of the melatonin made in the body is actually made in the gut.
Gut, right, the serotonin.
And so it's like, serotonin gets converted into melatonin. And my question is, what is it doing? What is it doing in the gut? Like, what is it doing in the circulatory system? I'm kind of interested in that. Like, I'd like to know.
I think this is, like, this paper really made me excited because I had hypothesized these connections and ran them by David, and we touched on it. We had, because of editorial limits on that first paper, we had to sort of walk away a little bit from the sleep part, and we mainly focused on the other stuff. But you know what it's like. It's like, okay, we're
too many words.
Right.
They make you trim it down.
Basically, but we got it in there. But we just said that people can adapt to sleeping cool. Now, these are like the Aboriginal studies that were done. These are, I think in the 30s or whatever, where they took literally refrigerated trucks into Australia, took the natives who, by culture, they sleep under 30-degree temperature, no covers, no blankets. They shiver all night, and they get perfect REM sleep. And yet, the Caucasian, control, those guys were just miserable, and they were horrible. And same thing with the Laps. The the Laps. They could learn to sleep in these cold, just on a little cot above the floor of the ice hut, and they were getting amazing sleep even though it was cold. And they weren't all blanketed, So what we know is we're highly adaptable. That's the point we make in the paper. And in fact, we know that, we've now, some studies have come out in terms of metabolic rate and activity. The ones that were done in NIH with 66 degrees F. People sleep better. I sleep better. Hospitals are cold, not warm, and there's a reason,
What I like to understand is, well, one, I can't sleep in the heat. That's,
right.
I think a lot of people are like that. But what I like to understand is, why core body temperature is absolutely under a circadian rhythm.
Right.
Obviously, melatonin plays a role in that. But I'd like to understand, like, why exactly?
Right.
Why is it that?
Right.
Why does your body being cooler, make you sleep? Like, why?
Right.
I'd like to understand the mechanism.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm curious.
Yeah.
I want to know.
Yeah,
and I'm trying to figure it out. I just started looking into it.
Yeah, I think it's tied to the fact of that drop in half a degree that the brain needs to see. That's at half degree, and it's really amazing.
Hibernation.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's when in winter.
Yeah.
It's when they sleep.
Yeah, and if you think about it, it's really amazing if you think about homeotherms versus poikiotherms. When you look at the difference in our regulatory mechanisms, and you look at how in the hell our bodies stay at this certain temperature, and another big leader in the the thermal regulation side, that's a whole nother branch of people. A really interesting colleague that I've met, and he's been amazing, Ivanov, has done all this stuff on thermal regulation. And interestingly, our temperature is a result of energy flux, and we don't actually maintain body temperature. So we're actually not maintaining 98.6. It's the net sum of what actually is going on. And that's really kind of interesting. And he's done amazing studies. When I was doing all this stuff with the energetic side, his stuff was really, really, really incredible. But it just seems like this theme comes up over and over, that these things get connected. And, and if you think about it, in the last century, and, that's the subtitle of my book, how our mastery of food and environment may have led to unintentional, chronic disease and obesity.
Super cool, Ray. This has been a very interesting conversation we've had. We've covered a lot.
Yeah, we did.
Covered a lot. But
the room didn't melt this time.
Yeah, right. If people want to learn more about, the science you're doing, the books you're writing, the experiments you're doing, anything about Ray Cronise, where can they find you?
Well, Google is easy. Just Ray Cronise. It's Cronise. I guess you'll slug that. Right now, for a short period of time, when this one, if you're looking later, I have a crowdsource. Our Broken Plate is the title. It's on Kickstarter. I would love your support to try to do this. This is sort of proof that we can sort of do this. And then my regular website is hypothermics.com, but raycronise.com points to it. I'll probably be blogging a little bit less. I mean, literally, I blogged once in the last year, twice. I'm not one of these people that has to put something up every week just to drive traffic, because I don't care. It's when I have something really to say that I put it up there. But go back and start and read, and you'll see actually where I was wrong. Because, one of the things that you and I know, but a lot of people, science, you're only learning when you're wrong. Right. And if your thoughts don't evolve, and if you don't change along the time, you're probably not like pushing hard enough. So you'll actually see my thinking evolve on this, and some of the things we've talked about today, I go into more detail. So that site, and then sooner or later, I'll probably have Our Broken Plate and do a little work on there. So hope to use that as a focus point to try to pull together some of the philanthropy money that's thrown at all the other stuff.
What about social media?
Twitter, it's at Ray Cronise. I have an Instagram. I think my Instagram is Mr. Zero G. You can link to all those. YouTube channels, and I'm not putting anything on there right now, but you can link to all those on my Hypothermics page.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Ray, for this.
Great.
Really interesting
It's been fun.